Hello, everyone. My name is Valerie Hawes. I'm the Organizational Learning and Development Lead here at Goodwill Columbus, and I want to welcome you back to the Goodwill Columbus Workforce Development Facebook and YouTube pages. Here at Workforce Development, we do a lot of things. We assist people with getting jobs, and we even help them at building their resumes and helping them to nail their next interview. And so if you need any assistance and you'd like for us to help you with that, please give us a call at 614-966-9283 or visit us by emailing us, at wfd@gwcols.com. And we will do whatever we can to assist you with advancing with Goodwill. But today, I'm going to be talking a little bit about Black history, and I've got two people in the Columbus community that are not only historians themselves, they're making history as well. So I want to introduce these two people that will come out and share some good information about some of the history that's been made right here in the Columbus, Ohio area. So first, I'm going to invite up Miss Rita Fuller Yates. Hi, Rita. How are you?
Hey, Valerie, thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. And then also I have Mr. Chris Bornay. Hi, Chris, how are you doing?
Hi, Valerie. I'm doing great. Thank you for having me on. I'm really looking forward to our conversation today.
Same here, same here. So, before we get started, I'm going to have each of you introduce yourselves. Tell us a little bit about what you do and what we'll be talking about today. Rita, you go first.
My name is Rita Fuller Yates, and by title, I am a lifestyle expert because I do a lot of different teaching in the community, primarily the African American community. But what my brand focuses on is connection, building relationships, and ensuring that the African American community has a resource and constantly evolves.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Rita. Chris, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yes, so I'm a writer, filmmaker, and a journalist here in Columbus. And I recently released the documentary Lady Wrestler, The Amazing Untold Story of African American Women in the Ring, which I directed, and chronicles the history of these amazing Black women who were world famous pro wrestling stars in the 1950s and 60s. And you, Valerie, of course, are familiar with this lost piece of history because your mother, Lula Mae Provo, was one of these trailblazing women.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much. I'm so proud of you for doing that story. So we'll talk about that a little bit. Rita, tell us about this video that we're going to play. I know that there was an interview that was done that highlighted some of the history that has been made right here in our state. Tell us a little bit about what we're going to see.
Well, what we need to understand is the state of Ohio was a free state, which makes the state unique considering that all the other 13 colonies was enslaved. So we had a new opportunity to create new opportunities as African Americans. And what the video shows you is three individuals, Black individuals, that made an impact to the community of Columbus. And one of our communities, the Poindexter Village, is named after one of the individuals that they talk about. The Lincoln Theater that we all attend to this very day was purchased by one of the other individuals that's in the story that we'll also talk about. So again, I think it just pays homage to those individuals that laid the foundation of Columbus for us for the past 200 years. We've been rock stars. We've been doing the work. We created the communities. We built the foundation. And I'm just here to tell the story.
Excited. I'm excited about it. And you know what? It's great when you have tangible evidence of things that have been accomplished that we can still reach out and touch. I live in that area that you're speaking of. I can walk to the Lincoln Theater if I want to. I can walk to Poindexter Village. And so just to know who those things are named after or how they came to be, that's inspiring. It's inspiring.
Well, I love that because you said exactly what one of my philosophies of why we need to learn more local history is because it's touchable. When you can touch something and you gain more confidence. When we touch our parents, there's just something that it does for our psychology. So history isn't any different. When you can touch history, it makes more sense to you.
Right, right. Okay, so let me go ahead. I'm going to share this video. Hold on one second while I share my screen and pull this up.
When an African American migrated to Ohio, Ohio was a free state. It was a free opportunity for African Americans.
And there were three men that took that opportunity and ran with it, starting with David Jenkins, who came to Columbus from Virginia.
He worked under the Underground Railroad. He owned a newspaper. He established schools. He was a part of the politics of Columbus.
His civil rights paper, Palladium of Liberty, was established in 1843 as part of his national efforts to bring slaves to freedom.
It is one of the communities that was in the 1940s that was established as the first project in the nation.
That project, named after James Poindexter, has now become a small museum in the area honoring the man who owned a barber shop at 61 High Street, planted and pastored what still exists as the Second Baptist Church.
If you want to know anything about Columbus, Ohio history, this church has it all.
And Poindexter became the first African American on the Columbus School Board, then passing the torch to James Albert Jackson.
He helped establish Bronzeville.
Jackson was a builder, a seed shop owner, then a grocer.
So his idea was, we need something of our own.
And he helped do it.
When blacks were being charged extra to go to the theater and sit only in the balcony, Jackson built his own, the Empress and then the Lincoln, that once featured a 4-year-old Sammy Davis Jr. and now flourishes again in 2021 under the direction of Susan Bradford Kunta.
He was just that type of guy that understood the value of community, but understood also being a teacher.
When Rita lived there in the 70s and 80s,
when I was growing there, it was what we call the hood.
Now, she proudly calls it Bronzeville, with 2 centuries of history to be honored and remembered.
Awesome. Thank you
Great
so much.
story.
It is great. You know what? It's interesting. So much came out of that particular community in and of itself. I mean, we've had politicians, entertainers. Actually, even what Chris is going to be talking about, that was the center of where those women probably were living and grew up. And I know my mother was sort of discovered in that area. So it's really interesting that that is the center for everything.
Yeah, and that's where why I spend so much time in this moment in sharing history in that community. I'm going to spread more to the other areas, but the beginning really was in the east side of Columbus, where we call Bronzeville. Even in the downtown area of Columbus, we migrated in that area off of Spring Street. The YMCA Spring Street was a segregated Y specifically for African Americans. So we own a lot of what is developed even today. And we created these communities.
And it seems like even though that was the center years ago, it's the center even now, I feel. I think that we do a lot to try to restore this area. There's so much beauty, there's so much wealth in the area, and it's unfortunate that people feel the need that they have to move outside of their communities. There was something that was it in this interview, or I heard you say before that, you know, in your mind growing up, moving out of the neighborhood was the goal, but now we see the value, you know, of why it's important to stay and keep hold of some of these things.
Yeah, I think the key is, again, knowing your history. I was born and raised on Long Street, and we sold our house in the early 2000 for $30-something thousand. And now it was recently sold for $270,000. And again, it was all because we didn't know our value. We were told that you lived in the hood, and that was a place no one wanted to live in. But obviously, 30 years later, that wasn't the truth. And so now that same area has been gentrified. But if in the history of Columbus, what we have to be careful about is that mostly all of the suburban communities were originally owned by African Americans. They come in and they retell the story. They basically market, brand a new way of living and a new lifestyle. They did it to downtown, and I live downtown, so I feel safe in saying it. They did it really successfully. They transitioned the story. But we in the East Side have to be careful in allowing them to do that, because sometimes as Black people, we can be so passive that we are like, well, yeah, that used to be our neighborhood, but now it's been gentrified and now it's just a story about us back in 1900. No, we have to stay in the story. And I think that's where we have to be persistent, that although we allowed you to be our neighbor, we allowed you to come in and make things better for us because taxes are better. But at the same time, we're not going to allow you to retell the story. And I think that's so important as gentrification happens in these communities.
We have to continue to tell the story. And it can't just be the word of mouth story. We have to write this stuff down. We have to document it in video and in books. We have to do that. Why do you think it's important for companies and organizations to honor Black History Month?
Well, honestly, I believe that it's the first way for Black people to get at the table, to have the conversation. But it's my mission to make it more than once a year, because we are visible more than once a year. We don't work in corporate America just once a year, once a month out of the year. We work side by side them every day. So to be recognized in using, again, the limited resource, they use us as a resource, but then they limit us. And that's been the history of us. But what I think is important is that we come outside of that and we teach us, that we write our own books, that we share our own stories, that we write our own documentaries, because again, it comes from our perspective, and the story does change when it's from our perspective. It's so important we get involved.
Very true. So speaking of documentaries and writing things down, Chris Bournet, tell us about the project that you have been working on. Tell us a little more details about that.
Yeah, so as you and Valerie, as you and Rita just said, the Near East Side, Bronzeville, that really was the center and continues to be the center of Black life in Columbus. And as you said, Valerie, the women wrestlers that I profile in the documentary, your mother included, grew up in that area and they trained in that area. The women that I was able to interview on camera, Ethel Johnson and Ramona Isbell, Ethel talked about her and her sisters, Babs Wingo, her older sister, and her younger sister, Marva Scott, who are also wrestlers. They learned before they got into the wrestling industry, they would go to the community YMCA and they learned tumbling techniques. So they learned like gymnastics and acrobatics, having no idea it would come in handy later when they became wrestlers. So they learned that all right there in the Near East Side community. So this is a story about women, Black women, who diversified and integrated pro wrestling in a fashion similar that Jackie Robinson did with Major League Baseball. So the story begins with actually a white man named Billy Wolf, a former wrestler from Missouri who settled in Columbus. He set up an office in downtown Columbus, and Billy had married a woman named Mildred Burke, a white woman whom he groomed to be the first women's world wrestling champion in the 1930s. And Billy knew that in order for his wife Mildred to have opponents and to even earn the title of, the world champion in women's wrestling, that she needed opponents. And of course, not that many women were in wrestling back then. There's still not that many women nowadays, compared to the general population. But Billy knew that he needed to recruit women into his organization. So Billy Wolf he was a complex man. He had a lot of kind of shady business practices. He was known for kind of underpaying the wrestlers and like having card games and saying, let's play poker and cheating his wrestlers out of their earnings. But one of his redeeming qualities was he was forward thinking about race. And Billy Wolf was inspired by Jackie Robinson. And he thought, if I recruit Black women into my organization, it will bring a lot of attention and buzz to women's wrestling, the way that Jackie Robinson integrating Major League Baseball did with baseball. So Babs Wingo, Ethel Johnson's older sister, was actually the first woman that Billy recruited. Then Babs recruited Ethel, and then then their youngest sister Marva saw them and said, hey, my sisters are, they're traveling around the world, they're making money, they're establishing, an international reputation. I want to do it too. So these three sisters from Columbus were among the first Black women in professional wrestling in the world.
It's something I don't even think I've put this together before. Rita, you said, for one, I did not know that you're saying that the YMCA downtown on Spring Street was segregated. That was for Blacks only at that time, or the only one we could go to. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, it was segregated, but that wasn't the Y. That was the YMCA downtown. It's no longer there, but it was on Spring Street and almost in the Columbus State area, CCAP
so
area.
So is that the Y that you're talking about, Chris, that they used to train at then potentially?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Potentially, if that was the one that was only the one that Blacks could go to. I'm not sure when the Eldon W. Ward Y, which is on, was it Woodland? I'm not sure when that came about, but yeah, it was definitely the women trained at the only Y in town that Blacks could go to, until Billy Wolf opened his own training facility downtown. And of course, he allowed all his women of different races to train there as well. Yeah, and these women, like women like your mother, Lula Mae Provo, they went all over the world. They weren't just well known in the Midwest. They went to Canada. Montreal was a big wrestling hub, different parts of Latin America. And in fact, Ethel Johnson had a ring name in Latin America, Rita Valdez. So she talked about going to Cuba before the embargo, Australia, Japan. So these women were popular all over the world. But of course, when they traveled down south, they had to deal with the same Jim Crow segregation that all African Americans had to deal with at the time in the 50s and 60s. So they would have to go in the back door of restaurants. They, instead of staying at a hotel, the mainstream hotel like the Hilton in town, they would have to stay at a Black person's boarding house, because as we were known back then, colored people weren't allowed to stay in the places where white people stayed. So the downside was being treated like a second-class citizen. The upside, if you can look at it that way, was a lot of Black athletes and entertainers became friends. Like, you talked about, your mother would tell stories about, getting to know the Harlem Globetrotters. And, Ethel told a story about sitting in the, lobby of one of the boarding houses playing cards with Little Richard, and Ramona talked about whenever they would go on the road, Ike and Tina Turner were always following in behind them. Like, they would go to a spot a couple of days later or a day later, Ike and Tina Turner would set up their, Ike and Tina review. So it was like they all had this camaraderie among them. Joe Louis, the legendary boxer, refereed some of the women's matches. So there was this camaraderie among Black entertainers because they were all facing the same racism at the time.
Yeah, and Etta James, my mom used to know Etta James. She used to know Nancy Wilson. You have that picture of
who's
them.
From Columbus. Yeah, there's a famous picture of Billy Wolf, your mother, Babs Wingo, and Nancy Wilson at one of the clubs on, I believe it was It was either Mount Vernon or Long Street. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to share my screen now so we can look at some of the slides that you have brought for us to take a look at. Let's see. Share. I can present that. Okay.
So this first slide is one of this first slide is one of the wrestling promotion posters that promoters used to use to advertise matches. And you can see the women were often referred to as ebony girls or Negro girls because that was the phrase, the phraseology they used back then. And so going from left to right, the women at the top are Babs Wingo, Ethel Johnson, the two sisters, your mother, Lula Mae, and then Marva Scott, the youngest sister of Babs and Ethel. And then you see a lot of times the women were on the same card as men, which was a novelty in itself. So people would a lot of times come to see these wrestling matches to see Black women on the same card as white women and see women on the same card as men, which was, just it was not done. It was unusual at the time. So if you want to go to the next slide, we have more memorabilia. So this is another wrestling promotion poster, and you see the term they use, Negro girl. And it was oftentimes they did. I don't know that promoters looked at it as demeaning women by using the term girl, but a lot of times it was either girl or gal. That was how they were referred to. And the term Negro was either Negro, colored, or ebony. That was, the terms that they used back then. This was way before even the term Afro-American that came about in the 70s. So on this poster, there's Sweet Georgia Brown, who was another well-known wrestler, but she, of course, was from the South. She didn't live here in Columbus. And then there was some of the wrestlers, not so much Billy Wolf's wrestlers, but some of the wrestlers used, sort of the stereotypical African garb. So this African princess wrestler she had that African garb, that sort of African stereotype that some of the promoters used to promote Black people at the time. So if you want to go to the next slide. So this is a tear sheet from a magazine, and this shows an upcoming match. And you can see the headline on the article says Negro Girls Title Online. Once again, the term Negro, term girls in reference to grown women. And it's showing a match between a wrestler who goes by the ring name of Black Venus, and then Marva Scott, the youngest of the three sisters who got into the business. And then if you just want to go to the next slide is my contact information. And this is the movie poster for the documentary, which is now available on Amazon. And just a little interesting side note. So I intentionally wanted the documentary to come out in February. And I sort of, to be honest, randomly chose a date. I grew up Catholic, and I actually found out the day after the documentary was released that it came out on Mardi Gras, because I looked at my calendar. It was like, oh, Ash Wednesday services. And I was like, wow, I accidentally chose Mardi Gras as the day for Lady Wrestler to come out. So that's just a little inside knowledge.
You know what? And here's the thing. The one thing that I really appreciate about you telling this story in particular, while we have, as a people, we have made many accomplishments in politics and as entrepreneurship and even in corporate America. One of the first ways, though, we were able to break color lines, though, was through the entertainment piece,
Yes.
through athletics. I mean, that was the easiest way to infiltrate in
Yes.
those periods. And to be quite honest, growing up, and some may think I had you on here just because my mom is partially featured, but the truth is that was a story we didn't talk about much in my house.
Right.
Women, they did not talk about that part of their life a whole lot. They didn't want others to know about it. And so it wasn't until you decided to do this story and do this documentary that I even associated their accomplishments with a Jackie Robinson. But I do know that they did break barriers. I think they were just doing what they do, but they weren't thinking we're doing it to,
Right. So a lot of black athletes and entertainers from that era, from the 50s and 60s, they had no intention of being civil rights pioneers, but they ended up having to take stands because of the situations they found themselves in. If you listen to some of the old Motown performers they talk about how they would have to do separate shows for a white audience and a black audience. And it was just like the women wrestlers. Ethel talks about in the documentary how she ended up taking a stand because she was just physically tired from having to do two separate matches, one for a white audience and one for a black audience when they would wrestle in the South. And she actually ended up taking a stand and telling one of the promoters, she said, look, if you don't let the audiences intermingle, I'm not going to wrestle, because she was physically tired of having to perform two separate matches. So she forfeited her money and, ended up driving back to Columbus and didn't even wrestle. And she said that's what stopped a lot of the promoters from putting on these segregated shows, because they knew women like Ethel and your mom were a top draw. And if they couldn't get them to come down to do segregated matches, then they would have to very grudgingly integrate the matches. But a lot of times it was like, okay, the white people were on the main floor, but the black people were in the balcony. They still found ways to separate the audiences by race. But Paul Robeson was another one. Before he became an entertainer, he was a football player. He took a lot of stands. There's the famous iconic photo of the black athletes who raised their fists at the 1970 Olympics. and Muhammad Ali, so there were a lot of Black athletes and entertainers that ended up just sort of by default becoming civil rights pioneers because they had to take stands in order for their working conditions to get better.
They had to take a stand, and then they had the larger platforms. They could introduce the audience to maybe someone else who was the expert. That Dr. King couldn't have done the work that he did if he didn't have Ozzie Davis, or Ruby Dee, or Harry Belafonte.
That's right.
Alongside
Lena Horne.
I have gotten the exposure without a Muhammad Ali around, those types of things. So they had to work together to move forward. They were very forward thinking in that way. And I think even now we have to, that's why I feel that a lot of the athletes and entertainers, they have a responsibility to take stands because the platform. Yeah.
And a lot of them, some of them that took stands, their careers suffered. People think, Colin Kaepernick was the first one who, got blackballed or whatever. Paul Robeson was blackballed. The athletes who raised their fist at the 1970 Olympics, they were blackballed. Muhammad Ali was not looked at as the GOAT, greatest of all time that he is now. He suffered a lot of blowback and blackballing. So it really was a risk. You were really, putting your livelihood at stake when you took stands. But it's like a lot of times they just got fed up and sick and tired. Like, I'm just not going to be treated like a second-class citizen anymore. They just got to the point where they couldn't take it anymore.
So, just to come to a close, I really want to say it's amazing the accomplishments that people right here in our community have made and have broken barriers for others in the future. I mean, we've had our first Black mayor, we've had Black judges, we have had huge, wonderful entrepreneurs, we've had entertainers. I think it was you, Rita. Did you post something on social media, on Facebook? You have a whole Columbus Black History page. Mm-hmm. And I have completely forgotten that people like Philip Michael Thomas went to East High School. Like, I completely forgot. I was like, not Miami Vice. I forgot about that.
Hal Williams from 227. Yeah, there's so many people from Columbus. Yeah.
And I think a lot of times we just don't, time passes and we just forget. But that page is definitely a great way to keep the memories alive. When we started the page last year, we really was just trying to find a place to store our history because we find so many stories, but what do you do with them? How do you keep them stored? So I said, well, why don't we just create a page and then I know I can always find them. But now it's turned into memories and history. And what I love most about it is just like Chris done with you, Valerie, is telling the stories of people that have lived here for a long time and they wasn't recognized because, again, African Americans didn't get opportunities for media unless it was even like the Call-in Post.
Which is where I started my career.
Yeah.
Chris started his career there. So I think our value system is not much different than it's always been, but now our resources have opened up and people like myself is able to take our stories into our own hands and tell our own stories. So I think it's huge what you're doing, what corporations are doing to spread the message of Columbus Black history. Because we really have our own Martin Luther Kings. We never have to leave the city for the next 10 years and we have enough content to share. I mean, just the story of your mother. Let me ask you a question, Valerie. How did it make you feel when you learned about your mom's story and how she impacted wrestling?
Honestly, look, I knew that she was a wrestler. She would make reference to it, like if she saw friends, certain entertainers on TV that she knew about the lifestyle. At one time, I thought I wanted to be an entertainer. So she was like, giving me the dirt about the business, that kind of thing. But I did not consider her a trailblazer, and it wasn't something she ever wanted to talk about publicly. So like it's a very interesting thing. I did a podcast with Chris, and I talked about my experience as a kid, and how my mother didn't want our family talking about what she did professionally. All the women, and I thought it was just my mom, but after hearing the children of the other women, Marva's kids and Ethel's and Bab's kids, they're all like, yeah, we weren't allowed to talk about it. They didn't want to talk about it.
Why?
So,
what was it? Well, tell me a little bit about what their understanding of it was.
I think it was the period of time that, this is just my thought, I don't think that entertainers and athletes were considered, the most, while they had celebrity, so to speak, they weren't considered as real legitimate professions per se.
So they wasn't respected.
I don't think it was respected in the same way.
Oh.
I don't even know. I mean, the way that I perceived it as a kid, though, was as if she was ashamed of it, and so she didn't want anyone. People knew that she obviously made good money and that she made a good living. She was traveling a lot. She was dressing very well. She lived very well, but no one really knew what she did. So I don't know why they didn't want to really talk about being wrestlers, but I'm sure that I don't know any female wrestlers today. I've never bumped into a female wrestler now. So I'm sure back then it was even more awkward to say, oh yeah, I'm a female wrestler. I don't know.
Right, and then for Ethel Johnson, she explicitly said, I didn't want my children to worry about me, so I didn't talk about what I did for a living around my kids because I didn't want them to be worried. Oh, mom's going to be gone for 2 weeks on a wrestling trip, and she could get hurt, and they wouldn't be able to concentrate on school. So for Ethel, it was more of like a protective thing for her children. And Ethel, a lot of entertainers have their stage persona and they have their off-stage persona. Mm-hmm. And Ethel was one of those people. She was extremely shy and unassuming. And she was out. I mean, when she was in the ring, she was like a wrecking machine. But when she was out of the ring, she was very. I mean, if you met, she passed away in 2018. But if you met her, you would never know this woman was a wrestler. She was very soft-spoken, very sweet, grandmotherly type. By the time I met her, so it was just like she had so her being shy and then her wanting to protect her children. That was her reasoning for it.
Yeah, my mom, I know that wasn't it for her. She just did not want people in her business like that. And I don't think she wanted to be judged. I think she thought judgment. Now, she never outright said it, but she never wanted us to tell people, even 30 years later, 40 years later. She didn't want me telling my friends. Why do you keep stop telling people I used to be a wrestler? I don't know why. So, anywho, but
it must have had some negative connotation that we don't know.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
That's it. I think there was some sort of negative connotation.
Yeah.
I want to thank you both for coming today. Chris, we have your information that you shared. So everyone, if you want to contact Chris for interviews and check out more information about the documentary itself, which is premiering on Prime.
Yes, it's currently available on Prime. Yes.
Excellent.
Amazon Prime, yes.
Rita, tell everyone how they can contact you for more information.
So all of my handles on social media, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn is Rita Fuller Yates. And how you can follow me is follow also Columbus Black History. And we have a news program that we are in our 4th season of Columbus Black News that airs. Our 4th season will begin on March 7th, Sunday at 5 o'clock. So please tune in to that page. You can follow that page on Facebook, Columbus Black News.
Excellent. Thank you both. I'm so appreciative to have you both in my life. And trust me, I will be calling you again and again and again in the future. So
absolutely. Thank you so much, Valerie.
Thank you, Valerie, and good luck to your future. God bless you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Bye-bye. Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Take care.